What's up guys, Lockie here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the number one mistake entrepreneurs are making that feels smart. I made this mistake for years and then eventually I fixed it and I was able to grow my business to $1 million a month by the age of 26. Without further ado, let's dive into my screen and let's cook. Okay, so number one, I've got a few talking points here. Crossing tasks off a list is not progress if you're in the same place 3 months later, okay? So when I was younger, and I see this for young entrepreneurs and even old entrepreneurs in their career that have been stuck for a while, basically, if you've been working and busting your ass in your business for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and you're still in a relatively similar position, you're probably doing this. When I was younger, I would wake up, I'd plan out my to-do list, and I'd have like 6 things, 8 things. By the end of the day, my to-do list was longer than what it was at the start of the day. And I had this bias because I wanted to make money fast, that the more shit I got done on my to-do list, the more money I would make. And this is important, the faster I would hit my goals. So I thought the more things I got done on my to-do list, the faster I would hit my goals. Now there is some truth to that, but I want to expand on it here a little bit. So I wasted months measuring myself by how much I got done. So phase one was when I was just like a normal 9-to-5 employee. I didn't do anything. Okay. So I had to start. That was not my problem. But then phase two, which is the person I'm speaking to here, is this was most of my career. I worshipped output and volume. So I had a bias towards getting shit done fast and trying to get the most amount of things to do. And there is some alignment here that when you're in the early phases of your entrepreneurial journey, you don't have any staff, you can't delegate anything, so you have to do everything, and that's okay, but you wanna get through that phase as fast as you possibly can, and don't stay in that phase. And I see this all the time. People will stay in this phase, and that was the mistake that I made, and I wanna try and help you to switch that flip much faster for yourself. So I believe that you get roughly 6 hours of real deep work a day, and that's like it. You may get an extra 4 hours of like brain dead work, replying to a Slack message, some data admin, whatever. But like after food, gym, shower, you really only have 6 hours, in my opinion, sometimes less if you have a bad sleep or whatever, to have creative problem solving energy. This is like the lock me in a room, I'm in deep work, I've had my coffee, my phone isn't going off, and I can really focus on a task that demands a lot of mental effort. If you're a sales guy, this is being on the phone actively closing. If you look at your talk time, if your talk time's higher than 6 hours a day as a closer, you experience a pretty significant like cognitive performance decline after that. Sometimes it's 4 hours if you have a really intense call and you just feel exhausted. It's the same thing with writing your sales letters, writing emails, writing copy, writing ads, filming ads, speaking with clients. So you really want to optimize that, like that 4 to 6 hour window of really deep work that is going to be focused on the primary constraint of the business. And typically it's one thing, okay? You're not spending the 6 hours you get per day of deep thinking, problem solving work on multiple things. It's not on multiple things. It's on one thing. However, I didn't think about this or know this when I was younger. I would have a to-do list of 8 things, 12 things. I'd have this thing where it's like the more shit I got done on my to-do list to tick off, the better I felt. However, the business 30 days later, 60 days, 3 months, 6 months later, was still relatively in the same spot. And I was confused. How can I work so hard every single day and my progress felt so slow? This is why. Because doing lots of small tasks fast is just mopping the floors of your own business. So grunt work feels productive, but it's low value. Nobody building 8 to 9 figure companies flexes about getting a lot done. The high value stuff is solving the one constraint continuously. So all of the most successful entrepreneurs that I study and that I've met, none of them flex how hard they work. It's really lame. Sure, you may see some people on social media like talking about that to rage bait people, whatever, to get views, but like really successful people, none of them brag about how much shit they get done, how fast they get stuff done, how many things on their to-do list that they've ticked off. It's almost laughable if you think about it from that perspective. What they really focus on and what they talk about and what they flex is the complexity of problems they solve that their competitors have not solved, or how there was a constraint in their business, which just basically means something that's limiting the growth of the business. And by definition, you can only have one constraint, one priority, okay? You can have multiple things to improve the business, but one constraint, it's like, if I could fix this, how would that impact the business more than anything else, right? They spend lots of time and focus solving one thing, and nobody talks about how many things they get done on their to-do list, because it's not an indicator of success. It's not an indicator of growth. And if you're earlier on in your journey, you've been stuck for a while, you're most likely surrounded by people, because it sounds really cool to talk about how much they work, how much work they get done, how many hours they work, when they clock in, when they clock off, but like the volume they're putting up. However, it's a very employee mindset. It's not a $1 million a month plus entrepreneur mindset. Okay, next one. Your business is a flow through system with one bottleneck, and your job, okay, as an entrepreneur, or if you're a sales guy and you're working in your own kind of like, you're still basically an entrepreneur, but within someone's company, right? If you're a contractor, your job is to find it, okay? You have a flow through and your job is to find it. There's always one point where the flow chokes, and that choke point is the only thing worth your deep hours. And this is a really important point. That's a pretty brutal pill to swallow. Is solving it can take months. Let me explain again, okay? The number one constraint. In fact, the more money you're gonna make from solving this number one constraint, the higher level of importance, the longer it takes to solve that constraint. Now, I'm just going to use a random example here. I don't know all the specifics of this example, so don't grill me. But I do know that one of the big constraints Amazon and Jeff Bezos worked on to develop same-day shipping was warehouses everywhere across the country. Can you imagine how many years, how much money, how much a pain in the ass it was to set up warehouses everywhere across the country so that people could get same-day and next-day shipping? I can't even begin to imagine the amount of complexity that goes into that. Even just the complexity of buying the real estate for that. Not to mention then building the warehouses, not to mention then the recruiting for the warehouses or finding and sourcing the materials, then the day-to-day operations and complexity to get same-day delivery from minimum wage employees who hate their job. Like, it is such a bitch of a problem, but he wasn't there replying to custom emails. It may have taken him, like, I don't know how long it took him. Jeff, if you watch this, leave it in the comments. But I imagine it would have taken him a year plus, at least, potentially years, to plan and build this distribution network that changed literally the entire infrastructure of what people expect in e-commerce for the rest of human history, right? Because typically before that, it's like you're used to like waiting a week to get something delivered because the place only has one warehouse to deliver from. They have to ship it across the country, etc. Right? That's like FedEx Express and FedEx Overnight. That's where all the money was made. But then Amazon just axed it and said same day, like insane, right? And so your job is to identify what is that one key constraint, what is that one thing that I'm going to get more tactical here in a second. Okay, I'm going to get more tactical here in a second. That is going to completely change everything. And the big thing, this is the hard pill to swallow, this is the level up of the mindset, is it may take months. Okay, let me say it again because I know the younger version of me wouldn't have been listening. You may have one thing, maybe two things on your to-do list for a month. Now, I know some people are thinking like, Lockie, that's not even possible. There's a whole bunch of shit I need to do on a daily basis for the business to keep running. Cool, I get that. I have that shit too. Put it on the 4 hours, put it on the back end of your day. Don't let it be the thing that takes up all of your creative, deep thinking energy you have for the day. Because you have a very finite amount of that. And if you're just going to make a bunch of excuses as to why that can't happen, well, then congratulations, you're just going to stay where you're at. You win, right? 1 to 2 things on your to-do list, maybe 3 for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, months, maybe a year. Alex Mosey frequently talks about how the book launch was the only thing on his to-do list for years. And you can see what happened there. He did 100 million in a weekend, right? Pretty insane. All right, next one. Don't touch your to-do list until the data shows where the pipe is choking. Vibes, all right, about what to do are usually wrong. The data is not. Spend hours, even days, analyzing before you write one task. And most founders don't even have the data, so you have to get it first. So this is a really big realization. I had this the most when I took my last company to $1 million a month, the education business. I had a spreadsheet and a tracker that tracked every single useful metric that I used. If you're tracking data but you don't use it, it's a waste of time. Every single useful metric from the entire marketing process to the entire sales team as a whole to every single individual sales rep, okay? And this was a really big shift for me because I would wake up and I would think like, how do I even decide what the fuck I'm gonna do today? Like, even think about it for yourself. Like, how do you even wake up in your business and even decide how to spend your time? Because if you want to level up in business, in life, you have to continuously improve the skill of delegating the very finite amount of time that you have to yourself. And this is even more relevant if you've got kids, if you've got family, if you've got other things outside of business that you want to focus on. You have to be even better at this, okay? You have to think about, how am I deciding what I work on? And in my opinion, the only logical way, if we're putting emotions aside, the only possible logical way you could decide to work on something and that it is a priority is because the data in your business tells you. And so there are so many things you'll hear at different masterminds, different YouTube videos, different, podcasts or whatever, different books about all the things you can be doing. However, I love Hormozzi's quote, which is strategy is the allocation of limited resources against unlimited possibilities or unlimited, things that you can do basically. That's strategy, okay? And so that's kind of what I'm describing here with the data is most people don't have the data. When I was building out my sales team, I would interview all the sales reps that were applying to work for my company, and they almost never had their data. I'd be like, what was your close rate last month? And they'd be like 40%. I'd be like, okay, based on what metrics? Like based on what numbers? How many calls you take? And they'd be like, I don't know. I'd be like, okay, so you don't even measure that. And like at best, they would maybe measure their show rate. Sometimes they'd measure their close rate as well. But like I measured everything. I measured the availability, how many available slots they had, how many of those got booked up, therefore what was their booking rate capacity? Is everyone at 80% capacity or is everyone at 40% capacity? If they're at 40% capacity, then volume of sales calls is the constraint. If they're at, despite what everyone's telling me or what everyone feels, I would know based on the data. If their booking capacity was at 80%, however, they were below KPI for the amount of money they were making, I would know then, okay, it can only be a few different metrics. It's going to be show rate, or if show rate is good, let's say 70%, 60%, then it could be close rate. Now, why is close rate bad? It could be because of two things. It could be because the qualified booking rate, aka how many people of the people who show up live are even financially qualified, is one thing. And then the second thing is just their close rate sucks. And I could easily know that because if the qualified booking rate was 80%, then that means it has to just be because they're sucking at closing. And then I can go in and specifically diagnose and solve that problem. However, you cannot think through this if you do not measure and track every single piece of data. Now, a lot of people just measure everything. They spend their entire life living in dashboards, building out dashboards and tracking systems with Claude. However, if you don't use the metric, okay, if you don't actually use the data, then it's just a waste of time and it's just going to confuse people. Just get rid of it. Don't even track it. You'll be fine without it because you're not going to use it anyway. So this is really important. You need to get the data. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, you absolutely need to do this. But also, if you're an employee, I know a lot of sales guys watch my content. If you're a salesperson, if you're an employee in a company, if you look at the data for your own role, and then take that to the founder, take that to the manager, they'll be extremely impressed and you will very quickly be overqualified to work there. I'll give you an example. If I was an account manager working for a digital marketing agency and I was managing accounts, okay, I would look at how many hours do I have to work per day. Let's just say you've got 10 hours to keep math simple, okay? Then let's say you have 20 clients, okay? And each client takes up 1 hour per week. That would be 20 hours per week you spend on existing client work, okay? Then you can minus that 20 hours a week, let's say you work 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 hours, you can minus that 20 hours a week off the entire 50 hours that you work that week. That means you have 30 hours more that you can delegate to new client work, improving the systems for current clients. Let's say you then added an extra 5 hours of work to handle problem clients here and there that rapidly show up. That means you now have 50% of your capacity full at 20 clients. Okay, so question, how many more clients can you take on before the service that you give to each client starts to dramatically decrease? 25. So if your founder is pumping you with new clients, then you have to go to them with that issue, and then they can solve it as well. So that's a simple example for a delivery position. Sales is really, really obvious. You know, with our setting team, we would track speed to lead. We would track how many times they actually call someone. So for example, how many leads a setter would need to make XYZ number of appointments set. We would track if someone is a lead that is 3 days old, what's the likelihood that if we set them, then they then show. So we had show rate for a book call by age of lead. So you can come to the conclusion that, okay, perhaps our setters shouldn't even dial people who are older than 5 days in terms of leads. And that can fuck with founders, because as a founder, you're like, I want my sales reps to be calling the backlog of 20,000 people because there's money there. It's like, yeah, there is money there. However, based on the data of the show rate of how old the lead is, you shouldn't have your best performers doing that. You can ramp new reps on that so they can make all the mistakes because they're not going to show anyway. Book them in with the low performing closers. Let's have the higher performing setters and the high performing closers only on leads that are within 3 days old, or even within 48 hours old, for example. And you may look at the data and say, okay, I feel like we have this 20,000 lead backlog, and what's stopping us from growing is the work my setting team is putting in to hit up this backlog. We get so much more money out of that. That's why our ROAS is low. However, the data, if you find that data, it may actually tell you, you just need to triple ad spend. Just triple ad spend. Only call the people within 3 days, and then anyone that's 3 days older than that, just pretend they're a dead lead or put them in an email marketing follow-up. Because you want to grow the business, you want to make more money, right? So that this is what's producing the money within this 72-hour window. Just accept the fact that that's a part of your business that you monetize within 72 hours. That's a bit of a ramble, that's a bit of a spiel specifically on a sales team, but that's a really, really important point. Okay, let's get a little bit tactical. Let me try and help you here, even though this is something that I learned over years and years and years of constantly putting more time towards this. And that's kind of like one of the points here that I want you to take away is the older I get in my entrepreneurial journey, the more time I will spend simply thinking and analyzing the constraint in the business and deciding what to work on. Let me say that again. The further along I get in my entrepreneurial career, the more time I spend literally thinking and deciding what to do with my time. I'm not going to give you some bullshit percentage or hours or whatever, but like I may spend a full day just deciding what I should work on. I may spend 2 days just deciding what I should work on, because once I decide what I should work on, I will just work on it, head down, for months. And then at the other end, it will fucking change the trajectory of the entire business. So here's the tactical ting for you, my guy. If you could only do one thing for 6 to 12 months, what would change the business the most? This is actually a bit of a goal setting principle I got from Brian Tracy, but it's a bit adapted. List every problem between you and the next level, or everything you already have on your to-do list. Then pick the one needle mover only that you can fix and cross everything else off the list or delegate it. Okay, now obviously you have to have a team, so you do have to go through that initial phase of like just doing everything and being that guy. But once you have a team, or even if you still have to do everything for the first 6 hours or the first 4 hours of your day, we have that deep work, have one thing on your to-do list. So like the best version of this probably for a solopreneur is like, you have your day in 2 chunks. You have the first half and the second half. For the first half, you only have one thing on your to-do list, and you're not focused on solving a high volume of tasks to just get shit done. You're focusing on solving the number one constraint in your business that you've identified through extensively analyzing relevant metrics that nobody else in your business will do. The one thing that would change everything. Alrighty, you solve real problems with focus, patience, and repetition, not speed. Super boring lesson. I know, please don't hate me. I remember listening to like billionaires talk about, it's about good people, man. It's about good patience, man. Like, dude, shut up. I just want to make $100 a day. But like, let me tell you, this is it, okay? This is the secret. Fuck, I wish I actually listened to this when I was younger, but I didn't until eventually I did the same thing for 5 years. It didn't work. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should try that patience thing, right? So focus is subtract everything except the constraint. This is really simple, very hard to do, very, very hard to stick to. Focusing on one thing is like the equivalent of only eating whole foods ever. And when I'm saying whole foods, I'm like fucking organic rice, like cooking beef, like you never eat anything fried, never any lollies, never anything bad ever. That is like the level of focus that you need. It's perfect. If focus is subtraction of everything else. So if I was going to give a simple example following the half day split for a solopreneur, it's like you wake up, don't touch your phone, you've identified the one constraint, and you just work on that for 6 hours. Nothing else. Don't check Slack, don't check emails, don't check WhatsApp, don't even think about anything else. And it's like, that's hard. That is really hard to do. But just like when you go to the gym, it takes practice. You condition the mental muscle of focus and you'll get better at it over time. And then you'll start, once you get good at this, you won't even understand how you even did anything ever without doing this. And then you can get to the point where you can do this. Granted, you always going to make mistakes here or there, but like for the entire day. And then you can do this for weeks. Like recently, I went through an offer rebuild for one of my companies, for my company, and focus, not one, just the one company, right? It took me 60 days of brutal work on one thing. I was putting together a sales presentation. It took me 60 days of focus working on one thing every day, and I was going pretty fucking hard. I was doing like 10, 14-hour days, sometimes longer. Wasn't that great from a sleep deprivation, not trying to flex me working heaps of hours. But the important lesson there is I worked on one thing for 60 days. And then I basically not had to touch it. And that's what generated the $70,000 in 29 hours. But before that, it was nothing. It was just a word on a Google Doc. But then I worked on it for 60 days. And then afterwards, it makes over $20,000 every single day without me virtually doing anything. So that's like the power of focus. Patience. Let me talk about patience. It can take a year before it works. Okay, so the longer you're working on a problem or the higher value the constraint is to solve, typically the longer it's going to take to solve it. I'll give you another example. So when I launched my education business, I was selling it over the phone. Then I had to build a sales team. Okay, that sucked. And to build a sales team, to get to the point where we could do $1 million in a month, and I wasn't on the phones, it took about a year. It was 16 months from the start of the business, but it took about a year of me going really hard into being a sales manager and a team leader and training and meetings. However, the constraint that I fixed was I have to be on the phone all day long making sales calls, pull a random number out of thin air. Let's say I'm capped at $250K a month. But I have to work all day, every single day. Sucks, miserable. I hate taking sales calls. Or I can have 20 people generate $1 million a month while I go to Japan for a week, spend 15 grand, 20 grand, and not really have to work. Not bad. Not a bad trade, right? Not a bad problem to solve, worthwhile solving, I think. However, do you think I'm going to be able to do that in a month? 2 months? 3 months, 6 months. Granted, it's my first time, so I could do that a lot faster now, but yeah, it took me 12 months. So I could have had, when I was on the phone selling, I could have had at the top of my to-do list. Now, granted, there's lots of subtopics, okay, but the idea is the important thing for you to grasp. I could have had build a closing team of 4 people, let's say 5 people who average $200,000 a month in cash collected without me selling. I could have had that one thing on my to-do list and just worked on that for 12 months and it would have been worth it. I had to say no to so many other things to focus on that diligently. And then repetition, this is a perfect example for the analogy I'm using right now. I did about 4 hours of sales training and meetings virtually every day for a year. I took some Sundays off. Sometimes on Saturdays we'd do 2 hours, but then sometimes on Tuesdays we'd do 6 hours. So like, call it a solid 4 hours on meetings, 6 days a week for a year. Locked in, going hard, not a chill listening to music meeting, like going hard. So I had the focus on the team, I had the patience to wait a year, and then I had the repetition of 4 hours every day just on live Zoom meetings with the team. Not to mention other cool reviews I did outside of that, refining the script, looking at the data, looking at everyone's individual statistics again and again and again and again. Every single Monday we'd sit down and go through every single team member's every single statistic. I would help them identify the constraint in their data. So that week they would focus only on the constraint. Maybe it's more dials, maybe it's their show rate. They need a better confirmation system to improve their show rate, whatever it is. These are the 3 things in addition to identifying the constraint that will make it easier in practice. So this is kind of like the payoff, right? I went from 8 tasks a day and stuck to 1 to 3 tasks a month, and that completely changed everything. So I hope this helps. My to-dos for you from this video is sit down, throw your entire to-do list in the bin, everything you think you know about managing time, what you're working on in the business, and literally just look at a blank piece of paper and think, where do I want this business to be in 12 months? Maybe 2 to 3 years if you're not as in much of a rush. And then you identify what is the one thing, if I did that over the next 12 months, it would be guaranteed to get us there. You write that down. You then spend the first 6 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours, whatever you can do every day, the whole day, ideally if you have a team and can delegate the other shit, to just working on that problem. That's it. And then everything else on your to-do list, you look at it with disgust, okay? Look at that shit with disgust and think, ew, gross. I am above doing that. I will not do that. I refuse to do that. If the business demands it from you, do it in the 4 hours at the end of the day. If you have staff, force them to take it. Get them to do some higher level shit as well. So I hope that helps. If you enjoy these sorts of videos, click subscribe, like, let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.